So, when you think of an insect, what's the first thing that comes to mind? A pest, maybe? Some simple little creature just buzzing around? Well, get ready to have that entire image completely turned on its head. In this explainer, we're going to dive into some truly groundbreaking science that reveals the astonishingly complex minds of insects. For centuries, this has been the standard view, right? We've basically seen them as tiny little automatons, just driven purely by instinct. Little biological robots, eating, mating, repeating, with no real thought or flexibility. But, as we're about to see, that picture is profoundly, and I mean profoundly wrong. That's a pretty bold statement, isn't it? Geniuses? That comes directly from researchers who are discovering that some insects have cognitive abilities that are, frankly, mind-blowing. Let's dig into what they actually mean by that. All right, so first up, we're going to look beyond those supposedly pre-programmed behaviors and start to uncover the flexible thinking that's happening right under our noses. This is really the central question here. A bee's brain is about the size of a grain of rice. So you have to wonder, how could something that small possibly has any kind of sophisticated intelligence? Well, it turns out size isn't everything. It's all about efficiency. Okay, let's start with some hard evidence that just shatters that whole instinct-only model. We're talking about tool use, a classic hallmark of advanced intelligence. So check out this fascinating experiment by a researcher named Lars Chitka. He gave bumblebees a problem they would never encounter in nature. They had to learn a totally new skill to get a sugary reward. At first, they were confused. But then one bee figures it out. She actually pulls the string to get the sugar water. And this is the really cool part. Other bees watched her and then copied the technique. They learned from her. So let's be clear about what's happening here. This wasn't something programmed into their DNA. No way. This was problem solving, it was innovation, and it was social learning, all happening in that tiny little brain. I mean, this one experiment completely changes our idea of what an insect is capable of. Okay, tool use is one thing. That's super impressive. But what about something even more complex, like, say, social intelligence, and even abstract logical thought? Most of us are familiar with the honeybee hive. It's this marvel of instinct and cooperation. But it's also very rigid. A paper wasp nest, on the other hand, it's more like a chaotic shared house. You've got multiple females, all competing to be the queen. There are constant power struggles, and social negotiation is absolutely key. This messy social life, it requires a totally different kind of intelligence. And this is what it takes to manage that kind of social life. Get this. Each paper wasp has a unique face, and they can recognize and remember dozens of other individuals. They keep track of who won past fights, who's allied with who. It's this incredibly complex social math. And to manage all that, they need a very special cognitive tool. That tool is called transitive inference. Now, it sounds complicated, but the logic is actually pretty simple. If you know Alex is stronger than Ben, and you know Ben is stronger than Chris, you can pretty easily figure out that Alex is probably stronger than Chris, right? Even if you've never seen them fight. It's a logical leap. So researchers tested this in the lab. They taught wasps a hierarchy of colors using some mild electric shocks. Then they showed the wasps a pair of colors they'd never seen together before, like blue and green. The wasps had already learned that blue was safer than purple, and purple was safer than green. And based on that information, they correctly inferred that blue must be safer than green. They actually performed a logical deduction. And this brings us right back to that powerful quote from the beginning. Look, a wasp isn't going to write a novel. But for the very specific, very complex social tasks they face every single day, like recognizing faces and navigating social ladders, their intelligence is incredibly specialized and super effective. Let's try to put this into perspective for a second. A honeybee's brain has about 1 million neurons. Now that sounds like a lot, and for its size, it really is. But let's compare that to our own brains. A human brain has around 86 billion neurons. The fact that an insect can pull off tool use, social learning, and logical reasoning with such a tiny fraction of that processing power, it just shows how unbelievably efficient their brain architecture really is. Okay, so we know they can think, but can they feel? This next section moves us away from just thinking and into the much deeper and honestly more controversial territory of insect sentience. Historically, the answer to that question was a hard no. There was this famous researcher, Carl von Frisch, who did an experiment where a bee that was cut in half just kept on drinking sugar water. The conclusion was that it was a purely reflexive response. But modern research tells a very, very different story. We now know they have pain receptors, and how they react to pain is way more complex. In one brilliant experiment, bumblebees were given a choice. They could go to a safe feeding station with a standard sugary drink, or they could go to a painfully hot one, but with a much sweeter reward. And what happened? The bees consistently chose the hot station. They were willing to put up with the pain to get a better payoff. Now, this wasn't a simple reflex. A reflex would be to automatically avoid the pain, right? This was a trade-off. It was a calculation. The bee actually weighed the cost of the pain against the benefit of the reward. That ability to make a calculated decision strongly suggests a conscious, subjective experience. And that is the very core of what sentience is, having the capacity for an inner world of feeling. So, what do we do with this knowledge? This isn't just some fascinating little piece of science trivia. It has profound and pretty immediate ethical implications for how we interact with the entire insect world. I mean, really think about it. Insect farming is a huge, booming industry. How can we ensure animal welfare if these animals can feel? What does it mean when pesticides cause billions of bees to die, possibly in agony? And does recognizing their intelligence and their capacity for feeling raise the stakes for conservation efforts? These are now very real, very urgent questions. So the whole paradigm has shifted. We've moved way past this outdated idea of insects as simple little machines. The evidence for their complex minds is just overwhelming. The question isn't if they think anymore. The question is how they think. And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. If these tiny creatures buzzing all around us have their own inner worlds, their own unique intelligence, and their own capacity for feeling, well, it forces us to completely reconsider our relationship with them. It's a huge question that science has opened up, and it's one we all now have to answer.